Well, good morning, Alec. Here we are, the morning after the appointment of the new cabinet. You wrote about it overnight, VancouverSun.com. What, if any, surprises did you see?
There were a couple surprises. There were some notable names who weren't at all surprising. Nikki Sharma staying in AG, Ravi Kahlon staying in housing, and Brenda Bailey had been expected to be named as finance minister. That was something that I think all of us in the media were primed for over the past few weeks. Some notable surprises are Christine Boyle in as Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation Minister. Maybe not surprising given, she was an advocate for Indigenous rights when she was on city council. She also has a very close relationship with the premier, but still one of those rookie MLAs. Likewise, Tamara Davidson in climate, not a surprise either, given, she's up north and one of the few northern MLAs. There's only 3 in the cabinet. Maybe Spencer Chandra Herbert in tourism. He was the deputy speaker for years, but now they've rewarded him with his own cabinet portfolio. It's not surprising that they've shuffled Lana. There's not a lot of surprises here based on who he has to work with. I keep hearing myself say there's not a lot of surprises. There's some names where maybe we were surprised they got into cabinet simply because they're new. But then you have to think about the fact of a lot of EB's caucus is new. It's with only 15 ministers returning. It's kind of expected there will be some new blood in there. It's not surprising to see some rookies make it. It might be surprising. The biggest surprise might be a couple of the things with the restructuring of how the cabinet works. Things like not making it at all smaller. There's still going to be 27 ministers, the same size as the previous cabinet. There has been some speculation that we might see a smaller cabinet this time around, given smaller caucus, smaller number of experienced MLAs and ministers to work with for EB. But no, same thing. And then with 14 parliamentary secretaries, and then you add in all of the, caucus chair, caucus whip, deputy caucus chair, deputy caucus whip, speaker, all 47 of the NDP MLAs, including EB, obviously as premier, will have pay raises going into the new session. So everyone gets a pay raise. Wow. If you're an NDP MLA, you get a pay raise. So that's an interesting thing to note. But not a lot of surprises here necessarily. We kind of expected Adrian Dix would be moved out of health. Josie Osborne moved into that portfolio. Maybe a little surprised to see Mike Farnworth moved out of public safety, even though that has been a concern. You might have expected him to stay in that position given his experience as a minister in a portfolio that is going to be important for the government. That's
right. Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Farnworth, and he's been there forever as an MLA and in cabinet forever and in important roles. You mentioned Solicitor General. Now he's in transportation and transit. Does that signal anything to you as far as what the province wants to do in those areas?
Not necessarily. It signals maybe a greater emphasis on transit but at this point, it's hard to tell. We don't have mandate letters. We won't have mandate letters until January. We can have indications. There's been some backgrounders put out by the government about specifically what the new ministries will mean. It's kind of hard to parse anything too much out of that until we have mandate letters in terms of what the priorities are. Basically, the priorities with this cabinet seem to be the same 4 that EB was talking about during the campaign, health, public safety, affordability, housing, and he keeps going on with that. One area that's interesting is municipal affairs. He's added that to Ravi Kahlon's portfolio, but at the same time, he's through cabinet order moved the responsibility for municipal affairs into the premier's office. He's given himself more control over that directly. That'll be interesting to see whether what that means. I know the premier's relationship with a number of municipalities has not always been so on even footing. So we will see how that works moving forwards. And now that's not set in stone. Calon might still be given some leeway with municipal affairs. He's obviously worked very closely with municipalities through being housing minister. They've also got Brittany Anderson now as the Minister of State under EB to coordinate with rural communities. Maybe that more has to do with that, the Kootenay Central MLA. But that will be an interesting area to watch. And then the elimination of the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, file that's been around since 2017, obviously a huge focus for the government in terms of, the increasing toxic drug crisis and, the focus on people with severe addictions. And
well, you say a huge focus. I mean, yes, they tried to at least pretend it was a huge focus by creating a ministry.
Yes,
but
they tried to
budget
pretend.
after budget after budget, I'd look in there and see next to nothing for whichever poor minister, initially Judy Darcy and then others, were in charge of that ministry.
Malcolmson, Jennifer Whiteside. Yes, it was a ministry in name only. It was still very much a creature of the Ministry of Health. It didn't have its own separate operating budget. It was very much controlled by the Ministry of Health, and it was opposed when it was first created by, at the time, the current provincial health officer, Dr. Perry Kendall, who's talked about, the need, much like Bonnie Henry has talked about the need for more harm reduction measures, which there's been a backlash against that recently. But he was critical of the ministry from the outset because he figured it would be a ministry in name only, and that appears to be exactly what it's been over the last 7 years.
So now, I mean, I guess the one thing is it's now been lumped in, presumably, with the health ministry. It's all one again. But now it's competing for dollars, I guess, limited dollars, for everything from overcrowded ERs to doctor shortages to new hospital requirements, all these other things. So I guess, will it have the space to, will it be made a priority? So we need to find out.
That's the big question right now. It'll be a huge task for the new Minister of Health, Josie Osborne, to control that ministry, which has over half the provincial budget. It's absolutely ginormous. Everything from, as you said, ERs to now mental health and addictions. She talked yesterday about how she thinks that having it back within the Ministry of Health will streamline operations and allow it to be a priority. Now, exactly how the ministry is going to be structured to make it a priority remains to be seen. It wasn't very effective before the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions was created. And then the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions obviously was not very effective on its own. And so we will see if there's going to be a restructuring within the ministry to make it more of a priority and maybe more effective. But that's something that we'll have to see in the months and years to come.
All right. And then the former health minister, longtime health minister, Adrian Dix, who's there for 7 years and led us through the pandemic, among many, many other things, moved into energy. What does that tell you?
That signals, and I mean, EB tried to talk about it as putting an experienced hand in the energy sector, which there continues to be. He talked about the continued demand for clean power coming from BC. Now we're having our own shortages of clean power. Site C is coming online, but that's barely going to put a dent in what we need in terms of our power needs by 2030. And so I think he's hoping by putting them in energy and combining that with Clean BC, which has been taken out of environment and put into energy, that they can focus on growing the green economy. Now, one of the key issues is with these resource communities is what are you going to do with those communities where mining, he's got Jaguar Brar and mining now, Surrey MLA, but how is that going to work? How is, the push for clean energy going to come up against these resource communities, whether that be forestry, whether that be mining, whether that be oil and gas, and really trying to create a path forward in both respects in terms of growing the power that we need, reducing our emissions, but also keeping these communities happy, or just helping them with some of the challenges that they're facing, which has been a line that the government has not been able to do recently. It's there was lots of mill closures, lots of other issues for resource communities over the past few years, permitting for mines. So we'll see how that comes out over the next few years.
Who's the education minister? That's another big challenge, obviously, with portables in Surrey and other issues.
I believe it's
Lisa Bear, I believe.
Lisa Bear.
Yeah.
Lisa Bear has been moved to education and
and childcare, which is interesting. Was that together before?
It was together before. Under Rob Smith-Singh, childcare was part of the education portfolio. Now they also had a separate Minister of State for childcare, and they still sort of have that with Jody Wickens this time around. But it'll be interesting to see how Lisa Bear handles that. There were lots of criticisms of the Ministry of Education. Evidently, the portable situation in Surrey, the overcrowding in schools. Even you had some, complaints about the SOGI program, which were brought up by the provincial Conservatives. Now that's been talked about by the Premier as a non-starter in terms of changes to that program. But in terms of getting schools built, in terms of getting childcare facilities built, because that's going to be the new pilot project for the government, and one of their campaign promises is to build out childcare facilities at schools themselves, and have before and after school childcare there, kind of moving away from the $10 a day program towards this new idea of integrating childcare. And it'll be interesting to see how Lisa Bear handles that. She's a solid communicator. She was in citizen services when they brought in the $10 FOI fee, which is very unpopular amongst us reporters, and George Chow remains burdened with that ministry. It'll be interesting to see how Bear handles all those issues, which is a big issue for the government when it comes to overcrowding, especially in places like Surrey.
Right. And you mentioned, of course, public safety being one of the key issues that the Premier said he heard the public loud and clear during the election. And so he has put two cops in charge of public safety, right? Former cops. Gary Begg is the Public Safety and Solicitor General Minister, and Terry Young as a Minister of State for public safety. That's an interesting pairing. You've got two big city cops, one an ex-Mountie, one an ex-Vancouver police officer, leading the show there. What do you expect their marching orders to be?
Their marching orders, well, first of all, the Surrey police transition, which is very close on the heels, and there's major issues with that in terms of is the SPS able to take over when the transition date? It looks like they'll only be confined to a couple of neighborhoods, maybe at this point, even though there's the transition going on and the continued fight between the SPS and the RCMP. But I think the hope is, one, with Gary Begg, they're rewarding the person who allowed them to keep their majority by 22 votes. At the same time, he is a cop. He does have an experience in Surrey as being a police officer. And so their hope is that they can improve relationships maybe between the two police forces, keep up the transition, and also have somebody who can speak the language of law enforcement at a time when law enforcement is having lots of issues, lots of complaints with the justice system, how people who are caught repeatedly for criminal acts are being handled by the courts, and maybe hoping that somebody who speaks the language of police will be able to communicate better and understand those issues to a degree that Mike Farnworth, as experienced as he is, he's not a law enforcement officer. He might not have the same ability to speak to cops in the language that they understand in their everyday. But and then Terry Young, community safety in obviously Vancouver Yaletown MLA. And I don't know exactly what they're hoping to do there. We'll have to wait to see what Terry Young's marching orders are. It looks at this point as if it's, oh, community safety is a priority, but it will be interesting to see what sort of tangible actions or tangible policies they give Young to enforce or to implement, because community safety is a huge priority for a lot of British Columbians at this point, to perceived rise in violent crime, perceived rise in petty crime, and perceived rise in public disorder, really wanting to see action on some of those key issues.
It's a really dramatic shift for someone like David Evie, who has of course a background in his younger days. He was very much a social activist lawyer with Pivot, etc. To think that as premier, I'm wondering if he could have imagined in those days that he would appoint 2 police officers to those roles to deal with public safety and community policing.
No, I don't think he could have. I think it's been a 180 born out of both a sense of pragmatism and also changing viewpoints by him on some of these issues, whether enforced by changes in public opinion, public mood, or his own evolution as somebody who does have that activist background and then went into politics, and seeing how things get done in the legislature, seeing how things get done at the policy level. And it is definitely a 180, but I think he appears, or he says he's seen the concerns around public safety. And maybe this is one of the ways that he's hoping to address some of those issues by putting people who have experience as law enforcement into two of these key positions.
All right. Well, thanks, Alec. We'll look forward to your reporting as the month wears on. And then, of course, those letters that they all get in January should tell us more about where we're headed. Thanks again.
Thanks, Harold.